Hello, and welcome back to the God the Artist podcast. I'm your host, Morgan McCarver, and today we have special guest Terrence Rotering. I hope I said your last name correct, Terrence. Rotering.
Alexa, she started at 5 o'clock with a fan sound there, so I apologize to everyone there, but I'm glad she did it then. But yes, Rotering, please.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Terrence Rotering, how did you realize that you were going to be a writer?
Well, that's a long journey. So I'm 63 now. In 2005, I had a couple little boys, 8 and 10, I think they were, in 2005, and they were reading little stories. And I said, oh, I'm going to write a story just to show them that they can have a voice, and that they can write books and stuff, in the future. So I wrote a small little 150-page story. I kind of made it about, well, it had our family members in it with slightly different names just so they could enjoy it. And so I wrote that one, and it was called Stand. And then 5 years later, I said, oh, that was fun. And they're a little bit older. So I wrote a bigger one. It was about 500 pages, and it was called The Faithful. It was a prequel to Stand. And I never really intended on doing a trilogy or anything with it, but I kind of toyed with it in my mind. And then I had a little bout with cancer, and I still remember asking God to, give me more time so I could finish the trilogy, which was a silly thing when I think back on it, of all the different things when you have a family and everything to be asking that. But so it took me 15 years after, I got over the cancer. It turned out to not be that big of a deal. And in 2024, I rewrote those first two books, and then I finished them with a trilogy. And then through a series of God winks that I hope we have time to get into because I think they're very interesting, the journey just continued. And now it turned into a trilogy of trilogies. And then last week I sent off to the editor um, kind of an expansion volume, if you will, to it because it just keeps growing and changing, and I'm very excited about it. So it's just been, I think it's been a God thing because I never really intended on being a writer. So
That is some exciting stuff to send off another revised version. What is it like to rewrite a book that you've written before?
yeah, so it was mainly for editing purposes because at the time, and still really, I'm a self-published kind of guy for a couple of reasons. One, it just, for me, it just takes too long. We'll find out, or you'll find out through the discussion here, that it's kind of an urgent thing that I wanted to get out there. That's the purpose behind it. And so, I just felt like that was something that I had to do was self-publish. So, and I forgot the question. I'm sorry.
Just what's it like to rewrite a book you've written before?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so it was mainly for editing kind of purposes, just to make sure it was tighter. And because I wasn't that serious about it when I wrote the first two. And now since it was starting to get serious, I wanted to, make it as tight as I could for punctuation, grammar, spelling, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Wow. So tell us a little bit about these books. You've described it as fantasy, sci-fi, and spiritual warfare. How does that all
It's
connect?
it's kind of the unified theory of everything is the way I look at it. I was thinking, hey, it's fiction, and because I started out for the boys and just for them to enjoy it, I didn't want to really restrict it to, stovepipe it to one genre, if you will. And so it started out mainly kind of fantasy. I always kind of talk about it like it's a mix between, Little House on the Prairie, Braveheart, and the Ten Commandments, the way it started out. Um, and so a lot of the fantasy there when it began. And then when I went to The Faithful, it started to dip a little into science fiction, and then Forever, The Faithful Stand Forever is the first trilogy. It really jumped into science fiction. Um, all of the genres together, that's probably a foul. I think these days, or maybe not. I never went to school for literature. I never went to school to be a writer. I just kind of have the feeling that we're not supposed to be mixing our genres. That's a no-no out there. The critics and such would say, no, you can't do that. And the way I view it is, hey, first of all, it's fiction. You shouldn't be telling me how to do my fiction. And the second thing is I kind of see all of this, at least in my writings, as an umbrella that's spiritual warfare. Everything falls under God. And so I can put whatever I want to under there and make it exciting. So it turns out it's, jumping ahead just really quickly, but it's like 9,000 years. It's 11 books. It's seven different dimensions, seven worlds. It just went everywhere. And I think there's a lot of freedom in that because it started out so loose. I can go anywhere with it, and so it's really fun, and that's probably what's given it the legs to keep going, just because it's so enjoyable to do. And man, it's really complicated. So I'm not really that flowery kind of, 20 pages on, the way the wind is blowing through the trees and look at, smelling the flowers and that kind of thing. It's kind of a more of a move along um, kind of story, more into the multiverse and how it's all put together, how everything works within it, how God's working within it, and the big struggle here is between good and evil, protagonist and the antagonist, and then it's like a chessboard through time with all of the different players on the chessboard and how they are interacting with each other and fighting to overcome the other side, basically. And I'm jumping ahead on your fourth question, but I'll go ahead. I tend to ramble a lot. I'm very excited about it, and there's so much to talk about it. I find that, I tend to go into 10 answers to questions for every one. So I apologize for that. I hope it's okay.
Oh yeah, of course. I love it. I love going down a rabbit hole and seeing where we come out. But did you say 9,000 years? Does your series span 9,000 years?
Yeah, and obviously it doesn't cover every year within the 9,000 years, but it goes from the beginning all the way to the end. So if okay, so if you kind of look at Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Peretti and Decker, those guys, um, one criticism I maybe have of some of their work is maybe not so much Peretti, but the others, they kind of, the stuff is, God stuff is kind of hidden behind, analogy or allegory or, whatever it might be. And it's not really that clear to all of the readers or the people that see the movies, if you will, just what they're trying to say. And so, you could watch Lord of the Rings with Tolkien, and although he did try to have a lot of spirituality in there and truth, from his perspective, it's hidden, and people can watch the movies or read the books and never really catch it. Same thing with even C.S. Lewis with Narnia and such. So I'm kind of screaming from the rooftops throughout the whole series, each one of the books, each trilogy, what they maybe are hiding, not hiding, but isn't really obvious to people. So I just really enjoy. There's God in the beginning, there's God throughout the books, and there's blogs with real life situations from all of my experiences in my life and the things that have flavored the books at the end through blogs and poetry and such. So, I don't like, the whole purpose of this is to glorify God and to, speak the Trinity to everybody out there. And as I have on the website, just one soul is the goal. So, if just one person comes through faith or to faith through the books, through what I'm trying to say, then, all the effort, everything that I put into it has all been worth it.
That's awesome. Can you walk us through the setting a little bit? Is this Earth or is this a completely made up new place?
I'm smiling because, my wife, Teresa, when she first started reading the first book, The Faithful, she got, I don't know, a few chapters in. And when she saw the sun was rising in the west, she kind of said, you know what? You need a lot of work with this. I don't, and I didn't want to tell her, hey, this isn't really Earth. So, I hesitate, although I just did, to tell everybody that it starts out that it's not really on Earth. But the first trilogy is in a place called Trinian, and then the prequel to it, the next three books, are also Trinian, because I put a bunch of stuff in the first trilogy, and I don't like when people, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi or whatever, they just throw things in there and you just have to assume, that's all true or it just works. All of the stuff in my books work. So I use, quantum physics and all that stuff just to make everything plausible so that it's not just crazy. But anyways, so the setting when it started out, Trinian is more of a, this is more of the swords and low technology and that kind of deal. And the same thing with the prequel, although you start finding out, hey, there's time tunnels and there's some rudimentary artificial intelligence going on way back then and things like that. So, that's where it begins. And then the third trilogy is when the Chronicles of the Seven Wheels, that's when it explodes into seven different. Are you hearing any feedback or is it just a little bit from me? And it might be my volume's up a little bit too high. But it blows up into these seven different worlds, and that's big time science fiction. And that's where you have, a land where, there's so much, but a land where there's people living in the sky on beams of light. There's people living underwater in underwater cities, and there's people living in volcanic, caves. um, places where there's multiple moons. So the settings change for all of these different worlds, and these people have all kinds of different things going on. So you never really get bored. Each one of the trilogies just adds so much to the story and answers all of the mysteries of the ones before, or the gems, I'd like to say, that are hidden within the story, that it never gets boring for people. But the settings, are constantly changing, and there's just a plethora of them and of peoples and all that kind of thing. But I will give something away. It's not aliens as in, these worlds have different peoples. They all started from Earth.
Mm, okay. So how do you invent something like that just from nothing, so to speak?
Yeah, and not having gone, to school for this, it kind of just, I think the story was kind of given to me. I always say I'm reporting it, that I'm not really sitting down and writing it, because I'm not that guy that sits down at a keyboard and stares at it until something comes to me. I'll go for a walk with the dogs, or, I think you may have had this experience too. I'll be driving and all of a sudden I have these ideas that just hit me. And I think part of that, Morgan, is when we're thinking about something else, we're doing something else, it takes away maybe part of that conscious mind that is, really trying to figure something out, because we're driving, or we're looking at sceneries, or telling the dogs to come back, or telling the Alexa to shut off like I did before. And then something will hit us, maybe, depending on what it is. It could be God giving us inspiration, or just our mind is free to wander. And that's when the ideas and everything come in. So almost everything that I've written, which is almost, 5,500, 6,000 pages, depending on how you look at it, is was spoken originally on the phone. So I just hit the record button and I put my ideas in there, or I talk. I have dialogue, people talking back and forth on the phone. And then I come back and I throw it on the computer and I fix it all up, and then there's a chapter or two kind of thing. But how does it come to you? I originally just one little short story for the kids, and then a prequel, and then a trilogy, yay, and then 14 years, and now it's just been on, the rewrites and the 9 books since then, all within the last 2 years. It's just been nonstop, chapter a day, 2 chapters a day, usually before Teresa gets up, because I get up very early. Talk about that with 316 Godwink. But yeah, it's come very easy, and I think it's, I don't want to sound crazy, but it's kind of been given to me. I don't really sit down and try to figure it out. It's just I'm amazed, because I'm not good enough, Morgan, to really come up with this. When I look at the complexity of it and how big it is and just what it's ended up saying, I couldn't have done this if I had sat down and tried to think of doing it. It's just come to me. It's kind of odd. Yeah,
Yeah, I love that. And you've mentioned the God winks a couple of times. Can you go into some of those details?
absolutely. Thank you. So when I was writing Trinian, which was the third book, I needed a place. So I wrote about half that book, or not Trinian, when I was writing Forever. I needed a place where it all began. And I had written all about it. And I almost said what it was, and I would have blown the whole thing. But it's one little island up that I had left on my map, and I needed to name it. And it was a place where I had written about where it all began, where people were sacrificing, this is the dark side, sacrificing their children to a demon over the fire. And that sounds really bad. And I should throw in right now, there's no bad language in the books. There's no sexual stuff in the books, but I do recommend 14 to 15 and up, just because, the evil side does evil things sometimes, and you have to be ready to handle that. Anyways, so I said, well, I don't know what to name this island, and so I'll take the first letter of each of the land masses that I put on my map over, 2005, I had Trinian and Omentia. 2010, I added Parlantis and Heath, and these were just names that I pulled out of my ear. Heath, because I flew jets at Lake and Heath, and different reasons for pulling out these names and just naming them. But those were the order that I named those. And then in Forever, I had added El Tigre to the story. So I said, oh, E&T, okay. And it was like Tophet. And I said, oh, that spells something. It sounds, let's see, what would that be, like Tophet or something? So I said, that's got a ring to it. I'll name it Tophet. And then a couple days later, I looked up in Google, and I always get the chills in the back of or the chills and the hair in the back of my neck stands up when I say this. I looked up on Google, and it said, yeah, this is I'm paraphrasing, a place in ancient Israel in the valley of Hinnom, where there was a sect of Israelites sacrificing their children over a fire to a demon called Molech. And I was like, okay, now that, first of all, that's impossible. And then it's like, okay, people, when I tell this story, people will go, well, you planned this. 2005, so for 20 years, you planned this, even though you never intended on doing a second book after the first one, or a trilogy 20 years later. And so it's impossible. The odds of coming up, and they're the order that I put those places in the story, you know, Trinian being first and Omentia being second. So it's like, how does that happen? So what am I trying to say? I don't know. I'm not trying to say, God is inspiring the words that I'm putting in these books, so they're like the Bible. No, not in any way. But I think he is inspiring me to use a talent that was kind of hidden for 39 years doing Air Force stuff, the high tech stuff. Um, and the talent I say is, not really me. If there's any talent, it's just God allowing me to do this. Um, to glorify him. So that's where it's coming from. And then after that, just very quickly, so being in the Air Force, I got in the habit of getting up really early. So I can't sleep past like 2 o'clock in the morning, which is a crazy, almost a curse. But for, about the same time that I started these books, I would wake up and I just look over at my clock radio and it would say 3:16. And so I'd go, oh, John 3:16. So I started posting on Facebook just the picture of the 3:16 on my clock radio and then putting John in front of it and then just posting that John 3:16. And I did that probably, I don't know, out of 2 years, the 730 days or whatever, probably 600 of the days. Sometimes I forget, sometimes I sleep through, whatever. So then all of these things started happening. When I publish Stand, use a little piece of gold that I've got, and I call them up and I say, hey, what are you going to give me for this gold? And at that moment, the guy's saying, it's changing all the time, but right now we'll give you $2,316. And I was like, okay, that's kind of a coincidence. I'll take it. And then I published the book, and the company's doing all their fancy stuff with the pages and stuff, and it comes out, and I always finish my books with three crosses. And so the last page of the book is three crosses, and it's on page 316, and I'm going, now that's kind of weird. The first lady that does a review on good books, I think at Goodreads, it's her 316th review, and I'm going, something's happening here. And so all the money, if I was going to get any from these, I was going to donate to our church we were building east of Colorado Springs. And it was delayed by COVID, and it was delayed by the city and all the stuff. And our first Sunday that it opened up was March 16th of last year, and I'm going 316, and it was just crazy. So these things just continue to happen. I won't go into all of them because people will get bored, but let me tell you, there's probably like 15 of these, all associated with the books. And then fast forward real quickly. I I was having so the first set of books, the first three trilogies really kind of revolve around this little girl, and her name is, I call her M, but her name is Emma. And that just happens to be my first granddaughter. So she was born a couple of years ago. So I wanted to put her in the book. And I put all the people that I've loved, all my friends and family and everything in some way or another as good people in the books, kind of thing, just so they, have something to go, hey, we're in there. So I had Emma in there, and everything was kind of revolving around her. It's a really cool story, even if I do say so myself. But I was like, well, I can't like leave my second granddaughter out. I didn't know when she was going to be born, didn't know her name. My son and daughter-in-law didn't want to tell me. So I wrote the whole story, the one I just sent off to the editor, the expansion novel. And it's basically three books in one, so I still call it a trilogy. But didn't know her name. It's all ready. It's all tight. It's all about these stones that I'm going to blow it for some people. And you have such a great following. I'm never going to have anybody not know this, but they'll still love it. There's some stones in the books, and you may think of them kind of as magic stones, but they're not magic stones. But the different colored stones reflect different fruits of the spirit or fruit of the spirit. So each color is a different fruit of the spirit. So this whole book is about the fruit of the spirit, gifts of God. And so then my granddaughter is born. And when is she born? I'm going to give you a quiz question. I bet you know. What day of the entire year would she be born based on this story?
Say 316, March
March
16th.
16th. She's born March 16th this year. And so they tell us her name, and her middle name is Thea. And I go, Thea? Who names their kid? What is that word? And so I look it up, and it means gift of God. And again, it's just like one of these. Maybe it's just for me. Maybe it's just because my eyes are open to see this, but it's amazing to me. I mean, all of these things are just an impossibility as far as, coincidence. And I always say in the books, there are no coincidences, you know. So, anyways, that's a really long answer, but yeah, these God winks have just kind of kept me going, thinking that I'm, hopefully doing something to serve. I'm an ambassador for God, so to Christ. So, if I'm doing something right, hopefully He's kind of saying, "Yeah, keep it up by giving me these little things." I don't know.
It's like he's showing you that he's there every step of the way.
Yeah. And again, not trying to say that he's blessing every specific, I mean, we're sinners. We do things wrong. I try to do everything right. I try not to, step on the word at all. And I only delve into little fictional things with the story that could be possible, but don't change the word at all and what he's telling us. So,
So a little bit about that because I was wondering, is this the type of Christian story where it follows the Bible stories but different characters, or is this more these characters know that the Bible exists? How does that work?
right. So this little girl, Emma, she ends up going, and I'll get to that, but she ends up going on these NASA missions. She's an orphan, and she goes on these NASA missions, and she brings this little bag of stones that she got on her last little trip with her parents before they passed away, different colored stones, and she has a book that's half burned from the accident, and it is the Word. It's basically all of the Old Testament and then bits and pieces of the New Testament kind of thing. So she ends up bringing this book to all of these different wheels, which are different planets, different dimensions that they go through a wormhole and they end up in all of these places. Long story. I'm going to be throwing a lot of things in there, but the dark side, Satan, he's trying to upset this. He's trying to throw off these missions, so they all get thrown into the wrong place, but they all end up on these different worlds. They don't know that they didn't come from Earth, if you will. They have this book, and all their societies were built off of that book, and so they think that that word is specifically from Earth, or to them from Earth, and they're kind of on Earth if they don't know where they came from. So getting to your question, it doesn't follow the Bible. They're not Bible stories, although there are Bible inspired stories of things that happen. Um, and my wife Teresa, again, she's very nervous about, well, you don't want to mix the word and these stories to make them fictional, to make it look like the word's fictional. And I'm very clear in the beginning of the book with a lot of scripture and being really obvious. This is not, supposed to take the place of the word or even add to it in any way. But these people do know the truth, and they do know scripture, and they do know, at least, the faithful, and the people that God is, faithful to. We're not always faithful, but so the good people, if you will, know what's going on. They know the word and they know the truth, and they're living by that. And so we can be inspired through the different challenges that they have. A lot of them you won't have because they're in these different worlds and it's sci-fi and fantasy and all this stuff. But some of them you will have, and so they can be inspired from how they handle them. Everybody can relate to some of the characters. Everywhere from orphans. There are no men are always the heroes. No, in the very beginning, in the first book, that was another thing. My wife's like, oh, all the guys are heroes and the women are. And I'm just like, just give it some time. The majority are women. You got orphans, you got children, you got men, everybody. So everybody can see someone that they can really be inspired by. And jumping ahead very quickly again, because I got to answer your ninth question that you can ask again. But what's different about this story is I wanted to make it, a lot of the fiction that's out there now, that whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, whatever, it's very dark. You can't let the kids watch it. You can't watch it because you're like, I feel too guilty watching that scene or that scene. And so it's very dark. And a lot of times they leave the spiritual aspect out of it, even though, or they say they are, but it'll have the occult in there, or it have magic stuff in there. It'll have, Eastern mysticism with the wheel that never ends, and all kinds of agnosticism, Gnosticism, humanism, nihilism, everything dark and bad. And this is all, I wanted this to be the opposite. I wanted it to be you're special. There is design. There is purpose. You do have help. Um, there is a God. He is good. He's there to help you, and you are a very unique person. You don't need to be like anybody else. The great puzzle maker is making this awesome picture of a puzzle, and you are a piece of that puzzle. And all the things you're going through in your life that may be hard or whatever, they're shaping you to fit right into that piece of the puzzle. And so I want to have it be encouraging, and I think each book, each trilogy, and the entire series is very encouraging. And then the last point on that is you get out of these other movies and stuff, and you're like, oh, that was fun and everything, but what did it teach me? What did it give me? Nothing. When you get out of this, you find out you got that first six books, and then it blows up into all of the different wheels and the different dimensions, and then this last one, I say last, even though there's another one, in the brew, but it comes down back to earth and it says all of this stuff that you've been learning about, you don't have a wand, you don't have a special ring, but you have these gifts, the gifts of the Spirit in these stones, which are really, I mean, it's pretty obvious in the book that they're the fruit of the Spirit and blessings from God in these different blessings. Um, you have those to fight this battle, and you're in this battle. So when you leave the theater, you leave the book, whatever, you leave this series, you find out you are in this battle and you have all the tools you need to fight it. So, I just wanted to be different in that way.
I love that. I think a lot of us can say when we read books, we kind of take on the personality of the book or feel like we are part of that book or that book becomes part of us, maybe. So making it to where it is real life, I think that's so important, especially with the spiritual warfare. What was some of your inspiration for that?
So, so I think you're getting to my personal spiritual warfare inspiration versus, I mean, so at 63, which is, you times three probably, you'll get to the point where you've lived life, you've, had different, like I said, the little cancer scare kind of thing. You've had people that you love pass away, your parents, different aunts. And I grew up, I had 20 different aunts and uncles, and I have one aunt left, so love them all. They're all gone. Mom and dad are gone. A lot of friends are gone. Flying friends are gone, crashes and such, the cancer thing, all of those just like all of the experiences of your listeners, Satan will use everything to attack us. He'll try to use it to question our hope. He'll try to drop us into despair, have us get depressed, have us start thinking that we're not special or God's not taking care of us, maybe. So all of the different experiences in life, as well as movies and reading your Bible and knowing that great cloud of witnesses that are there, all the things that they went through, all of that stuff fed into the things that are here in the books. And again, with 11 books and 5,500, 6,000 pages, there's a lot to get into, and there are so many situations. Yeah, I think people will be able to find a number of them that they can really relate to, and hopefully it'll inspire them. And mainly it's because the characters in the books are inspiring and encouraging each other with God's word, and wherever the word is, that's a living and active thing. I mean, a two-edged sword, and it is, I'm hoping that through these books and through the word being in there, that it actually does reach people directly. And I think that's almost a sure hope because, we're promised the word will work. It's up to God just how it works with every individual person. So I think everybody that reads it will get something different from these books. So yeah, that's what inspired it. Nothing specific, like I was sitting in my room and I saw the devil or anything. Although now that I said that, when I grew up, I had dreams for probably 5 years and it woke me up almost every night of the devil coming down the hallway with his pitchfork trying to get me. And I always wake up right before that. So, that's an interesting question you brought up there because I hadn't thought about that for years and years. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what exactly inspired each thing.
Yeah, that is amazing how some things that relate to it or some things don't relate, things from your childhood you might not even realize. But He knew you were going to write this story the whole time. But you started in the Air Force, is that right?
Right. So I only child in Wisconsin, went off to Colorado Springs here when I was 18 for 4 years at the Air Force Academy. And then I did 20 years in the Air Force, and the highlights of there, staff jobs. And then I was like Goose in Top Gun. I was a backseater, but it was an F-15 instead of an F-14, F-15E. And I don't know if anybody, I'm sure everybody kind of knows, but a few weeks back over Iran, they had an F-15E that was shot down, and they saved the pilot right away. And then it took a really big effort to find the WISO, the weapons systems officer, which was me in the back seat. Same jet, same base that he came from, Lakenheath over there, and same seat, same aircraft, all that stuff. So I could really relate with that. Um, yeah, so I've got a lot of flying stuff in the stories. Oh, and then after that, I went to NORAD Northcom, which is here at Peterson in Colorado Springs too. I don't know if people know what NORAD is, but basically defending, the country against attack from others outside. So I did like 39 years overall in the Air Force, and it was a great time serving. But yeah, so that there's a lot of flying kind of situations. There are people that are flying jets. There are people that are flying, spacecraft. and there are people that are flying dragons. So you've got the whole gamut over the time frames in the series here, and I use some of that just from my experience.
Yeah, that's so cool, especially for you to have that experience, and thank you for your service. But what was it like to write from the perspective of like riding a dragon or something that you know similar to flying, but something you haven't experienced before?
Yeah, so the dragon, so there's also a medallion that's passed on through, long story, but passed on through the Veteri, which are the truth keepers in the story. And there's a truth keeper that has a medallion, so he can actually communicate with this dragon that he's flying, kind of thing. I guess it was a lot of ways like that. The dragon is the pilot flying, and we always used to joke at the backseat or the Wizzo, we do the navigation, the communications, electronic warfare, the weapons. We do everything, and we hold a banana in front of the pilot in the front to tell him which direction to go. Um, obviously the pilots are awesome and they do a lot of work. So the dragon was basically the pilot, I guess I'm speaking to the dragon the same way I'd be talking to the pilot in the jet. Um, and so yeah, so what's it like? It was fun. The whole thing has been a lot of fun, and through those God winks and through the motivation of knowing that I'm at least I'm trying and I'm praying and I'm asking God to help me spread the word, His word and truth. I see myself as one of those truth keepers in the story. Um, Although I just now in this last one, I created the terrible thing, and I actually put myself into the story for just a very, half of a paragraph kind of thing, because I trace, that 9,000 years we talked about, I trace good and evil through that time period. And there's basically this, again, there's way too much to explain, but this set of stones, there's one stone color that's missing, and that's the crimson stone. And basically that's been stolen by Satan way back when all the stones were formed and da, 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 the fictional aspect of all this. But and through time, this crimson stone is kind of feeding evil and the bad, the Hitlers of the world and stuff going through time. And there's a gold stone that is kind of being passed through the truth keepers and the positive. So jumping ahead again, there's so many facets to all of this, very complicated, and which is great. And I got another tangent. It's good for the 15-year-old because they can enjoy all of the sci-fi and the fantasy and stuff and get some word from it. But it's also good for the scientist and the nuclear physicist and stuff because of all of the the wormholes and the tesseracts and all of those things that are in there, the time dilation and how I made it all work so that it's not silly and dumb. They can enjoy it too. So, anyways, when you get into this last book, part of it is there's people finding these artifacts from the spear of the centurion to the crown of thorns and all that. And anyways, in the Cronus Terminus, which is the end of time, I'll give you a little secret: when Jesus comes back, um, there he through his passion he reunites the crimson stone to the spectrum of light and all of the colors of the rainbow, if you will, the colors of the spectrum, to once again unite light and bring about the end. So of course God the Father is the only one that knows when this is going to happen, and these people didn't actually make it happen, but he's kind of the sovereign that's in the back, in the background of all of this, orchestrating it and working even Satan's all of the things that he does through the series, to try to upset all of this and take control of the creation. He uses everything, even the things that he was doing, to shape those pieces to finish the picture, and then to bring the end and to bring his people home. So wow, every time I try to explain this, because there's so much, it's always different. So I hope that kind of made some sense, but didn't give too much away.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm definitely intrigued. You've inspired me to want to read these. And you said the last book, and then you said, well, maybe not. So, what does the future for this series look like?
Yeah, so what's so crazy about it is every time I think it's finished, there's a whole nother, I don't know, just expansion to it that, I start off going, oh wait, there's some things I still needed to explain. And then that explanation, that expansion becomes, you're going to have to go back to the first trilogy now because you didn't really know what was going on. And I didn't either. That's the thing. That's why I say I reported it. So what does it look like? So this next one will come out next month, on the first day of summer, on June 21st. And what better to do than to buy some series books on the first day of summer and start reading? But again, it changes everything. And so that's cool. And then, but as soon as I did that, I said, "Oh my goodness!" And I said, "Here's some more areas that I need to go into." And then that became each one seems to be even better and better. So this one that I've got 100 chapters already started, the basic part of it, of each chapter, I think is going to be the best one. So it's exciting to me because it just keeps getting better. I don't know. I don't think it's because I'm becoming a better writer. God is just going, okay, now you and everybody else that's reading them, you can handle this, and here we go. And so it's so neat just to see it exploding. So that's what there's going to be at least one more. It's really hard to get out of the universe that I've created because it's so big now and exciting, and good. And there are people I should also mention. There are people from the first books that are traveling around because of the Tesseract and their ability to travel, and there's no Godfather paradoxes, and time problems, that you see in a lot of the sci-fi movies. I think I've figured out a way where that doesn't happen. So, they're okay. I'm going to stop because I could just keep going. But yeah, there's going to be at least one more after the one that comes out next month.
Oh, exciting, exciting. And your sons, I guess, have kind of grown up with these stories then. What do they think about it?
Yeah. So, to be honest, they haven't read them. It
Really?
isn't that weird? Yeah. So, and one interesting story when one of my sons that has the two granddaughters now, when he was getting married, he found out that I had him and his fiance in one of the books where he had to go find her because she got taken and all this stuff. And again, it's just their names. I don't like build people's personalities or any personal information or anything in them. I just did it because I kind of, it's a way of kind of immortalizing them, I guess, or some silly thing. But he was like, "Oh, Dad," he got very defensive about having her in there and stuff. He's like, "Stop that." And it was kind of hard because I had finished that book. It was already getting published, and I had written a whole bunch of the next one that continued it, and I couldn't use their names. So I had to figure out a way to not use their names, but have everybody that's reading it still know it's them. So I did that and it turned out even better. So that was God kind of doing it again. But yeah, they haven't really done it for various reasons that would take another podcast. But it's not because they don't love their dad or they don't like me writing or anything. There's other reasons, but I don't want to get into them right now. Yeah, but they are excited about me writing. They just haven't read the books yet, which
I get
but I
you.
do tell them if something ever happens to me, I'm there. You can find me in the books because I try to share a lot of what I've learned, over my life in there through different characters and such.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you see these books as your legacy?
Absolutely. And I get up every morning, and this is going to be a short little thing, but I think it's really useful for everybody. And I smile. And what do I mean by that? Is I looked at the letters of smile, and I broke them down into service. Who am I serving? And what I try to do is serve God, right? And then my mission right now, my mission in the Air Force was all that. My mission as a father and as a husband. But right now, that I needed a new mission, so I wanted to write these books and share God's word to even more people. So that became my mission, kind of a horizontal. And then the I is intentionality. What am I going to do today as I'm laying in bed? What do I do today to for my service and my mission? Intentionality. And that builds a legacy, which is what prompted me to think about it when you said that. Day after day, when you're doing something that you think you should be doing, it builds a legacy of a bunch of days and a product, which these turned out to be something that I can't imagine having done now. And then that E is eternity. So that leads you right into, if you're going down that road and that path and you're laying those bricks, then that's going to take you where you want to go. So it's a life well lived. Um, so yeah, I can't even imagine Morgan now after, you know, that's the other thing. You're like, come on, this isn't going to go on forever. But at 61, wherever you are in your life, don't be afraid to try new things. I always had everything was scientific and technical. And then all of a sudden I'm playing guitar and I'm hiking around and photography and writing these books. And I cannot imagine a life lived where I would have died and not written these books now. They have become so special to me. And I'm very proud of them. So yeah,
What I think is so cool about that is you said there's such a Christian intention in these books, but they also are fictional. And so these books could end up in places that the Bible might not ever be allowed to go, so to speak, in Earth when it's ruled by Satan, especially after the rapture when people are looking for truth. I think that could be something really interesting. And, who knows what the future looks like. But I think it's amazing that these books have such truth within them, but it's not hidden, like you said at the beginning. It is obvious in that you're going to find who the king is ultimately.
It's called unfencing the fiction is basically what
Mm.
I learned that from. I was looking around. I was like, where can I put these books where I can ask it to, do some, analysis of it? And I found one thing. I'm not getting paid by Microsoft, but there's, Gemini. If you paid $19 a month, which I have, it's nothing for what it's done. I don't use any AI to write anything or anything like that, but I was able to put the entire books into it and create a gem. And then I was able to ask it questions because I wanted to know, is it actually coming across the way I want it to? Is there something in there that I don't want in there, because I am trying to speak truth. And so far, I haven't found anything. I've got like 13 different 3-inch volumes of the answers that I've been able to ask, and it gave me answers to, and I printed out because they're so awesome. It's so neat. So I would encourage authors to maybe think about doing that because if you have especially if you have a bunch of books in a series or something, and you want to make sure it's going the direction you want it to go, but it's also really useful for like, give me the battles, give me the people, give me, and it, just spits stuff out, and it helps you just see what it is you've created. And so that's where I learned that, unfencing the fiction thing, and bringing it home. That's what this next one does. That's getting released. It brings it home to the reader directly and right to earth. And that's why I cheated a little bit, put myself in that line that's going through on the good side, very small. But just just to encourage people. I lost my train of thought, but yeah, that's the thing. So it's really cool. Gemini, yeah, that's what it was. AI, and it's kind of neat because AI in the story at the end, kind of in the end times, is big and bad. It's under the influence of this guy called Block, which is beings like our kind, and he basically, it's basically artificial intelligence, but it's Satan and demons and all that stuff, and inhabiting the artificial intelligence entities that I call them and influencing. So yeah, so it's got a bunch of end times kind of stuff in there too. It's got something for everybody, to tell you the truth. But yeah.
Excited to read these, and I think it is such a great use of AI that I had never even considered to like use it to basically be a test dummy, so to speak, of reading your book and seeing if it got the message you were trying to say. I never even considered that before.
It's hard to find somebody that's, to be honest with you, because I've written all these so fast and through 2 years. To find someone, I have a couple friends that have read all of them, which is great because I can bounce this stuff off them. But yeah, to be able to ask the specific questions about character arcs and the themes and just how tight the resonance is and all that kind of stuff, and then compare it to other authors. I've said, hey, compare me to the top 25 giants in the genres of sci-fi, fantasy, and spiritual warfare. Tell me where I'm doing well. Tell me, and the biggest criticism is you're not as descriptive as some of these people. And I'm like, and that gets us to right to the beginning. It's the urgency because it's got the word and stuff in there. I don't want to be like the Tolkien that created a great Lord of the Rings, but he spent 12 years doing it during World War I, and millions of people died in it, and he never reached them, even if he would have been clear in what he was trying to say. I want it to be clear. That I think that's why, if I may, I don't want to put words in God's mouth or his thinking, but I think he's wanted me to reach out to touch people with this, and I can't spend years and years and years doing it and hoping it gets published. I got to get it to people. So yeah, so that the AI has helped a lot.
I love that. How are you getting your book out to people?
Yeah, so it's obviously, if someone Googled my name, uh, they would instantly find like podcasts like this, where all the books are, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere they're published, and then my Chronicles of Trinian.com is my website that has the podcasts, the reviews, the connection to the books, and different things about them to try to, tell people why they might be interested in reading them or giving them to their neighbors or their coworkers or their family members that maybe aren't you know, believers, just because they could really enjoy the story and at the same time, hopefully, find out the truth of what's going on around them.
Do you
But
see
yeah,
these
go
as
ahead.
audiobooks?
Yeah, so right now it's kind of time intensive, very time intensive, or very expensive to get, Morgan to read them for me. So, that would be really hard, but they are all on Kindle, which is kind of cool. So most people have some kind of Amazon deal and a Kindle thing. And then there's all kinds of apps like Speechify. I don't know if you've heard of it, but you can get that fairly cheap per month. And it has like 1,000 different voices. So anything that you have digital, electronic, you can just have it read it, which I think is almost even better than an audiobook because, sometimes I want that British guy reading it. Sometimes I want a British gal reading it, some American voice, whatever, and I can switch constantly. So not audio as an audible yet. Um, that's down the road when I'm not overwhelmed with every day having to write, all these chapters, but definitely on Kindle. And I think, that's useful, in the car, Kindle app, boom. And they're all cheap. You can get the whole series for like 30 bucks on Kindle because I've kept them as cheap as I can because I'm trying to get that word out there. So I'm not really trying to make money. Primary purpose, Morgan, I think you would probably agree, is to, reach people with the truth. And that's really what I'm trying to do. So.
That's great. And I've got to ask you, you are very prolific. You're writing all of these books in 2 years, but what is a project that you have wanted to do that you haven't gotten to work on yet? Or what's down the pipeline for the next thing?
Hmm. That's interesting. So I've started dabbling with, and this isn't probably the best answer for that, but I've started dabbling with um, using AI to make videos of different chapters. And then also, there's AI out there, and I've already pushed Gemini, so I'm not going to push 11 Labs or anything. Ooh, I just did. But that you can make songs. You can just go, hey, here's a couple pages from my chapter, some characters. Here's where I want it to go. 30 seconds later, it makes a song that's like it's gonna be a problem with artists these days because I've spent like 2 hours doing it and I've got like 10 songs that are my favorite 10 songs, and they all are talking about the books, but subtly. So making trailers, I'm hoping AI in the future will allow us to give us, like software where I can just plug these books in and it'll make movies for me as opposed to, and that sounds silly and crazy, but when you look at the songs they're making, like, wow. And the movies, even, I made a really quick trailer the other day, and it was like an MTV, and way before you were born, but as good as an MTV video. And it's took me like 30 minutes and it cost me nothing. So I think down the road, maybe we'll be able to do this with things we write. And wouldn't that really help the kids in school, in high school, say, if the teacher could say, I know you don't like writing, but write 3-page story. I'll look at it and then I'll put it in my program and you guys will all watch it. You'll watch it as a short video, and all the kids would be like, yeah, that'd be cool. So I don't know. Hopefully AI will be, there's going to be good and bad with it, right? But hopefully that'll be one of the good things that I'm hoping for. But other than that, I'm getting old, Morgan. So, I'm writing this book series. I got thousands of pages. Another project? Oh my goodness.
No, I am shocked that you are able to write that much. I think my book was under 300 pages. Like that, that's as far as I got. We'll see what happens in the future, but I am just amazed that you're able to create these stories and settings even. And I guess that's the sci-fi part, using the AI for good. I love a book trailer, so I'm definitely going to check that out on your website too.
With the first trilogy, the Chronicles of Trinian, when it starts out with the faithful, they're probably pretty into it. But remember, most of that was written way back when. So once you get into halfway through the second book and into the third book of all of them, that's where you really get into things really pick up and stuff. So I guess I'm trying to encourage you, if you did start with the faithful, don't get bogged down. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's like reading Kings in the Bible or something. So it changes. Every book is different. Every trilogy is different, and they just keep exploding and getting more interesting. So just wanted to throw that out for mainly the female readers when they start, because I was writing for my boys as guys and stuff in the beginning. So it might be a little bit harder for gals when they first start.
You brought that up. I've always wanted to ask a writer, and most of the books I read, the writer is, long gone. They're from the anyway. So, when you write a prequel after the first book, right? Prequel. Do you read chronologically or do you read based on year written?
Yeah, so and one of my friends that I talked about who's read them all said, "Oh no, you should start with the promise. Start with the promise, time redeemed, and then you read the faithful stand forever." So I should thank you for asking that because that, when the trilogies came together, kind of planned, but kind of not planned too. It's almost another God thing. So the first one, the faithful stand forever, that became like the theme of the entire series, but that's the first trilogy. And then the promised time redeemed is the second one. and that kind of comes before. So in all of the books, it reads, you know, in the part in the front, it reads, "The promised time redeemed ensures the faithful stand forever." So that kind of became another big thing. And then the so to answer your question, you can do it either way. He said you should start with the second trilogy first. You could do that, or you could just read the third one, which is Origin, Trinity, the Gathering, and Cronus Terminus. And the little saying that goes with that is before the origin of time, the Trinity wrote the names of the gathering in the book of life for Cronus Terminus, for the end of time, which is what Cronus Terminus means. So they all have like that kind of linguistic thing with them too. So you can really read them out of order. The only thing that would probably be questionable is there's spoilers that you would read before the mystery part. You know what I mean? So the way I wrote it was first trilogy, second trilogy, third trilogy, you know, expansion, and knowing that, I wrote in a lot of mystery that you get later answers to later, right? So you plant the gems and then they're solved later. So that's the only thing that I haven't really thought through all of the different iterations and possibilities of what Morgan might encounter if she read the first or the second trilogy first. So that would be the chronological way of doing it: second, then first, then third. But I don't know. Or do you
Okay.
want to do it where, like the author wrote it, where he has the mysteries and then they're solved in the prequel? Eh,
Yeah. I'm getting flashbacks of people telling me how to watch the Star Wars movies when you.
exactly, exactly. And I think that's probably where I got it from. Although I built so many mysteries in the first trilogy that I was like, you know, you gotta have answers, and so I had to do the second trilogy, which is the prequel, and you get a ton of answers and a ton more questions, and then yeah. So,
That makes the best kind of reading, though, when you're solving the problems yourself. I love it. I'm looking forward to reading these. I'm so excited.
and to be honest, now that I've written the fourth one, because I've got people that were in the first one, the first book, the faithful, are huge in the fourth, the expansion. So, you know, I looked back, just one more quick thing. I looked back because I was grabbing them and pulling them out, throwing them way into the future. And these, I hadn't even, you know, in 2005, I hadn't planned this stuff. So I was looking and I was reading this section towards the end, the grand finale, if you will, and these colors were turning different colors and they were reflecting off of the armor of the good guys in all these other different colors. And they were all the 12 colors from the book of Revelation in the colors of the city walls. And I think I did put them in then, but I had forgotten from so many years before. And then later on, when I came up with the gift of the Spirit, and the fruit of the Spirit, and all the different colors associating with different fruits of the Spirit, um, that became huge. And then when I went back and I saw where I was pulling these guys from and seeing the colors and the colors on the armor, I was like, that is so cool because it just, again, I couldn't have planned this stuff. I'm not good enough to do this. Somebody else has been at work in this stuff because there's no way, you know, when you have 9,000 years, 11 books, hundreds of characters, good and bad, and all this stuff that's going on, people going between books and all that, and keeping it all straight and not having, hey, by the way, you screwed that up kind of thing. I'm not big enough to do that. So I'm just really impressed and thankful that God gave me something, you know, in this stage of life to really share.
Yeah, I love your humility, and I love how God's just orchestrated all of this and given you all of these ideas just right when you need them. I think that is so awesome. And I know I'm not the only one who can't wait to read the books. So I'd love for you to give a little plug about how we can get your books just one more time and any kind of final advice you have for the listeners out there.
Terrence Rotering. I think if you have video, it's down there in the corner. But if it's just audio, last name is Rotering, Rotering, and first name Terrence, Terrence. If you put that in Google, you'll get everything you need as far as where to find the books and my website and all of that. And then I guess what I would share is, you know, we all have different talents. We don't necessarily even know what they are because they're God given. And so I would just encourage everybody to try new things, no matter what age they are. You might really find that God wants to use you through something new. Um, and then just roll with that and give it a shot because this has been just a tremendous blessing for me. And even if it's just a blessing for me, to be able to share the truth and his word with people, that's been awesome. But I really hope and I do believe that he's reaching people through it. So just one soul is the goal. And I just encourage everybody to smile every morning, like we talked about, and then look at what you can do to serve your master.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Terrence, and we look forward to talking to you again once you have your next book out.
Thanks, Morgan. Appreciate you letting me be on.
Until next time.